from the heart of our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., bringing compelling interviews, insightful analysis, taking you beyond the headlines and sound bites into conversations with our nation's leaders and newsmakers, all from a biblical worldview. Washington Watch with Tony Perkins starts now.
On this vote, the yeas are 50, the nays are 50. The Senate being evenly divided, the Vice President votes in the affirmative. The bill as amended is passed.
That was Vice President J.D. Vance presiding over the Senate earlier today, where the reconciliation bill narrowly passed after over 26 hours of debate. Welcome to this July 1st edition of Washington Watch. I'm your host, Tony Perkins. Thanks for tuning in. President Trump says the bill should move quickly through the House, but the version the Senate passed looks very different from the one that first cleared the House, and many of the provisions that helped to build a coalition the first time in the House are now gone. In just a moment, we'll be joined by Alabama Congressman Robert Aderholt, a senior member of the Appropriations Committee, who will walk us through the next steps and offer his perspective on how the House is likely to respond. Also ahead, first it was parents, then state legislatures, then the courts, and now even the media is beginning to admit the truth about the junk science behind the transgender movement. We'll hear from Dr. Michelle Cretella, past executive director of the American College of Pediatricians and the current chair of its Adolescent Sexuality Committee. Next week, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is scheduled to meet with President Donald Trump in Washington to discuss ending the conflict in Gaza. We'll talk with Virginia Congressman John McGuire about what a true and lasting resolution would require. And continuing focus on the Middle East, with Iran potentially defanged, Syria under new leadership, and momentum building behind the Abraham Accords, are we witnessing a path to peace or the setup for a larger confrontation? Author and Middle East expert Joel Richardson will join us for that discussion. And before we go to our first guest, a heartfelt thank you to everyone who partnered with FRC and Washington Watch over the past few weeks. Several of you made calls yesterday, and I'm grateful to report that with your prayers and support, we finished our fiscal year right on target. That means we're ready to keep standing for faith, family, and freedom. So thanks for joining us. All right, as I mentioned at the top of the program, the Senate passed the version of its version of the big, beautiful bill earlier today after nearly 27 hours of what's called a vote-a-rama. Now, 3 Republicans joined the Democrats in voting against the bill, which set up the vice president to cast a tie-breaking vote. The legislation now goes back to the House. In fact, I believe right now, as we speak, it's in the Rules Committee. And what's the process that it's going to go through? How long will it take to get to the floor? And what are the prospects of passage? Here to discuss this, Congressman Robert Aderholt, who is a member of the House Appropriations Committee. He represents the 4th Congressional District of Alabama. Congressman Aderholt, welcome back to Washington Watch. Thanks for joining us.
Tony, good to be with you as always.
All right. Before we get into your take on the Senate version, just walk our viewers and listeners through the process of what's going to take place over the next 72 hours.
Well, from the best I understand, and we have been on standby over the last several days, thinking the Senate would pass a lot sooner than it did. So we could have a similar situation in the House, but as things stay as scheduled right now, the bill will come out of the Rules Committee sometimes probably tonight, and then it will move forward to be put on the floor in the morning. I got a message from the whip's office that we would start debate around 9 o'clock in the morning and would expect a vote then shortly thereafter. So we could be wrapped up by probably by noon tomorrow if everything goes as planned. But as you mentioned, things are very different on this bill than what it was when we passed it out of the House of Representatives. Some of my colleagues have some concerns about it. I understand that because obviously it was a better bill that came out of the House, but we are presented with this bill now, and we have to decide whether we're going to vote it up or down. And at this point, it doesn't look like there's an opportunity really to make any changes. Obviously, if everything falls apart, there could be some conference committee that's put together, but I think the president wants to see this move forward in a expedited manner. And while it's not a perfect bill, and if someone like yourself who served in a legislative body, there is no perfect bill out there. But obviously, it's we need to move forward to keep the tax cuts in place.
That's probably the most significant portion of the bill that remains unchanged is the tax extending and I think making permanent the tax cuts that are in place. That if that's not approved, there will be a massive tax increase on the American people. But some of the other issues, Congressman, that you and I care about, for instance, the defunding of Planned Parenthood, it was in the first bill, the entire window of the appropriations, which was a 10-year window, it was defunded. Now it's narrowed down to simply a year, which is really a pause in funding, because is Congress going to revisit the funding of Planned Parenthood?
I sure hope so. I mean, obviously, I'm like you. I did not want to see this change that came in the Senate, and this is one change that was certainly disappointing. But obviously, it's getting this 1 year moratorium, as you call it, is actually, at least that is some good news. And for that reason, I think it's worth supporting this bill. But obviously, also that I know that you care about, and so many of us care about, is the adoption tax credit is also included in this bill for up to $5,000. And so this is something that will really help a lot of low-income households who may be unable to adopt. And as you know, adoption is very expensive, and therefore for us to try to help the average American out there go through adoption, this is welcome news.
Where do we stand on the Medicaid reforms that were being proposed to keep those who were in the country illegally from tapping into those federal dollars? I know the argument in reducing some of the Medicaid spending was to preserve it for those who were truly in need. Where does that now stand?
We're trying to find out. Actually, I just had a discussion on my staff just in the last few minutes about this. We're trying to find out what the language is. Of course, we do know that the reporting requirements are still in there. That requires Medicaid recipients to prove their eligibility twice a year as opposed to annually as it is now. And the expanded work requirements are included. And so there is that in there. But as far as for the illegal aliens, that is something that we're trying to verify right now to see exactly what the language in the Senate bill includes or doesn't include.
And Congressman Adderholt, you're the chair of the Values Action Team, so you more than most are focused on the issues that we care about, faith, family, and freedom. Of course, you've got an outstanding voting record on those issues. The other aspect that was in the House version that's completely out in the Senate version was to keep taxpayers from being forced to fund these experimental drugs and surgeries for transgender minors and others.
Right. My understanding that was removed from the bill due to the Byrd Rule. And that is, but obviously, like you, I'd have liked to have seen that in there, but the Byrd Rule, according to my understanding, that was why it was pulled.
How do you think your colleagues, I mean, you can't afford to lose many votes and get this through, because you're not going to get any Democratic votes for this. It's going to have to be all on the backs of the Republicans. Already, I've heard that there are several, I would say at least 6 or 7, I've heard that have said are leaning toward this out of the House Freedom Caucus. What are you hearing in terms of the prospects of the bill?
I think it's too early to tell, quite honestly, but I think at the end of the day, I think most members realize this is a one opportunity. The president wants to see this. We don't want to have a tax increase. If this does not go into place, then we will see the highest ever peacetime tax increase in American history. And certainly no one wants to see that. And obviously, no tax on tips are included in this. overtime, no tax on overtime is included in this, and then the border wall funding for border funding for Builds the Wall, while providing for support for the men and women, the agents, the officers out there on the front lines, and then 150 billion for defense, and which includes the Golden Dome that the president has talked so widely about. So there's a lot of great things in this bill. Again, is it perfect? No, it's not perfect, and I would be the first one to say that. But obviously, as you know, it's very difficult when you have men that are operating a legislative body to come out with a perfect bill.
Yeah, that's what, they say just in church work where you have church committees. Committees are not the best way to do things. In fact, they say a camel was actually a horse designed by a committee. But let's talk about the fiscal aspects of this, because that's another area of concern for some of the fiscal hawks in the House. They were actually wanting more of a reduction in the House version. They didn't get that. How's that going to go over? What are we looking at here in terms of the increase to the deficit and ultimately to the debt?
Well, that's going to be a sticking point, no question, and that's where that I think a lot of my colleagues will have a problem. And obviously, in a perfect world, I would like to see that change too. Of course, as you know, the debt ceiling is increased up by $5 trillion. I know a lot of members have had some concerns about that, but at the same time, this does not raise the debt by $5 trillion. It just increases the ceiling, which I think is an important distinction. I think when some people hear about the debt ceiling being increased, they think it's an automatic $5 trillion increase. But obviously that's not the case. It would just increase the ceiling. So, but obviously this is going to be one of the sticking points, and I certainly wish that we could have a bill that was that does not do the spending as it is. But obviously, no one wants to see a tax increase for something like $4 trillion on the American people either.
So let's talk about, we just have about a minute and a half left, Congressman Adderholt, the appropriations process. How can some of these concerns be offset in that process?
Well, certainly this appropriation process, we're well under our way. We are already have passed, I believe we have passed 3 or 4 out of committee that will be ready for the House floor. And we've already passed one appropriation bill on the House floor, the military construction. So we're well on our way, and we're trying to cut spending drastically on the House version. Now, obviously, it's got to go to the Senate, and the numbers may change. But in the House side, we are actually tamping down on the spending, and we are spending way less, even in the appropriations process. And of course, as you know, that's important to do. But at the same time, at the end of the day, we have to look at the long term of what these entitlement programs will do to this country. And that's where we're really getting to making a difference.
Right.
So while appropriations important, the entitlement programs is where really we can do really make a real difference.
That's where the lion's share of the revenue goes.
Yes,
Congressman Adderholt, always great to see you. Thanks so much for taking time to join us today.
Thanks, Tony. Always good to be with you.
All right. Coming up next, the Trump administration is trying to make the most of the momentum in the ceasefire